Welcome to our presentation on lawn alternatives, specifically focusing on native ground covers today. My name is Elesha. I am the environmental educator with Virginia Cooperative Extension Prince William, and I'll be joined later by Yvonne Reid, who is a master gardener also with Prince William. So in order to learn more about alternative ground covers, we have to learn about a fairly popular ground cover known as lawns. It's not native, so how did it get here? The term lawn refers to a clearing or a tract of open or lightly wooded ground within a forest, also an open area in a forest that was often used for hunting. In the 1700s, lawns were very popular with European landscape designers and were often only reserved for the rich who were able to maintain it with crews and hand tools. And lawns were also seen as a huge display of wealth during this time. Thomas Jefferson enjoyed the aesthetics of a lawn so much, he actually designed his Monticello estate to have lawns surrounding it. A little bit more back history, the first manual lawnmower was actually patented in 1830 in England, and a spiral blade mower patent was filed in the US some 30 years later. The growing popularity of lawns led to the lawn exhibition that was created by the US Department of Agriculture at the first World's Fair on US soil. Post-World War II, in the 1950s, the GI Bill made the homeownership a reality, and the idea of having a perfectly manicured lawn shaped the ideal American lifestyle. The rise of suburbia, lawns, and an increased interest in golf grew in popularity, which today leads to the extensive research that's currently being done on turf grass, diseases, lawn herbicides, seed varieties, and things such as sod. Myself included, grass was just a normal part of our childhood. I remember spending hours of my day just rolling around and playing in my parents' backyard. And we've carried the same ideas for lawn throughout our adult lives as we bought homes, rented homes, and kind of just accepted grass as a cultural norm around here. But for many of us, they are a requirement by your homeowner association to have green, lush grass in your front yard. I know for my HOA, we are required to have a certain percentage of weed to grass ratio, and it must be green at all times, and that is written into the community rules. So that is one reason why we have it. Grass might also just be something that performs well on your property. You bought the home, you notice the grass is growing well, so why bother something? If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So we just decided to keep the grass present because we know that works well. For other people, there is also a time or budget time restriction. If you are a full-time worker, you might not have enough time to put towards having a perfectly manicured landscape. Whereas on the other hand, if you are a retiree and you have a ton of time on your hand, you might have a more perfectly manicured landscape. For other areas, such as play areas, sport fields, golf courses, you have to have grass just because they have the durability that is required for that type of environment. And going off of that, pets are also falling into those recreational spaces. Pets put a lot of damage onto our yards, and we don't want to have a lot of time and money invested into an area for flowers if there's going to be a dog that's going to be urinating all over it. So we have these types of grasses just because we have different requirements for use. There are some benefits to having a healthy, well-maintained lawn. Grass is a type of ground cover, so it protects frozen ground over the winter and helps prevent erosion by wind and water. It can also filter out runoffs a little bit, so it has some water quality control and flood control, and it also reduces some noise pollution. So it acts like an insulation panel to absorb and deflect sound. It improves soil structure and microbial activity while creating a cooling effect during our warmer, hot seasons. And it also adds some visual appeal to our properties. There are some issues with having a traditional lawn. Grass is considered higher maintenance. They have a lack of biodiversity, and they are a monoculture, so they have a heavier reliance on fertilizers. And this can cause severe runoff issues in rivers and the Chesapeake Bay if nutrients are applied in excess amounts. They also have higher water requirements, so during the summer when we're hitting those 95-degree days, your fescue is going to need some more help in order for it to prevent from going dormant. So watering helps keep them healthy and growing. And like I said before, it's a monoculture. So they don't have as high as a wildlife value as a diverse garden bed does. So they don't have as strong as an ability to support our local beneficial insects. And they can be improperly placed. You could be trying to grow grass on something that does not want grass. So people oftentimes just throw down some sod and think that's what's the best. But in reality, you could be planting something that's a little bit better than grass. Virginia is in this weird area known as the transition zone. So we experience super hot summers, but also really cold winters. And because of this, when we go to pick grass seeds to plant in our yard, we're going to need to focus more on the cultivars that are in that bag of seed that you have in your hand. Virginia Cooperative Extension has a list of recommended turfgrass cultivars. It is an annually updated list that tells you what grass seeds have been tried and true and tested at Virginia Tech that thrive in Virginia and are better for our area. So I would recommend checking out our website and looking up that list so that way you know for next time when you go to the store what you need to buy. We also recommend for every 10 hours of mowing that you resharpen your blades. The sharper your blades are, the cleaner the cut, and the cleaner the cut means there will be less likely disease to come into those damaged blades, and it'll help you maintain a healthier lawn in the long run. We also highly recommend that you go and get a soil test done before you start anything. We recommend you get a soil test once every 3 years just because soil conditions are a little bit on the slower side to change, but you never know what could happen in terms of pH or your phosphorus or potassium levels. So Virginia Tech offers soil testing. It is a baseline price as of right now for $10 for a regular soil test. But if you want to add soluble salts or organic matter testing into that, that's also an upcharge. But it is a heck of a lot cheaper than if you've gone to a private lab and get your soil tested through them. And we'll also give recommendations on how much lime to apply and what the appropriate fertilizer is for your property. So going off of fertilizer and pesticides, I know many of us might be a little bit more hesitant to use it, but in those times that you do need to apply a fertilizer or a pesticide, Virginia Cooperative Extension has a pest management guide that's updated annually. That is a 300-page document on what you need to apply or what you can apply and what does and does not harm. So it is a good reference point as to how much you should be applying and when to apply and what to apply it on. And if you ever need assistance with figuring out what to apply, you can always contact our office. Another cultural control you can do for lawn care is to increase the mowing height, because if you have a higher mowing height, you actually reduce the amount of weeds and have a healthier lawn and encourage more growth. So by going off of that, it's also the 1/3 rule, which we all should be following, is you don't take off more than 1/3 of the entire leaf blade at one time. And you also allow clippings to naturally decompose because that feeds back some nitrogen that you clipped off back into the soil. So it's essentially a free fertilizer. Who are unable to take the jump into having a all native garden, or they have to maintain the green grass for your HOA. A good in-between option is a pollinator, or better known as a bee lawn. And a bee lawn is basically a lawn that has traditional grass seed in it, but is also a mixture of low-growing perennials that can be treated just like a regular lawn. And these provide further food and habitat for all those pollinators, whereas traditional turfgrass environments did not provide that before. So they help maintain the grass aesthetic and also provide some ecological value and a food source for these pollinators that need our support. The image on the screen is actually an image of the Smithsonian. They have a garden area, but they also have a pollinator lawn that they have established in, I believe, 2020. So they have planted a mixture of clover, which is the little white tufts you see in the grass, but they also seeded with some regular low-growing perennials, and that's their recipe that they have found works best for our area. So this is an option for you, and it does not need to be mowed as often, and it still has that grass in it that some people might want or need. Off of the Smithsonian's bee lawn recipe, this is what they had put into their lawn when they converted their traditional into a bee lawn. So as you can see, they've added fescue, but they've also added this extensive list of Virginia natives. I've highlighted Dutch white clover and creeping thyme for a couple different reasons. So Dutch white clover, it is non-native, but it helps fix nitrogen into the soil, and it's actually just naturalized into our environment. So it thrives pretty well, and a lot of recommendations on turfgrass says that you should be incorporating white clover into it if you can accept it as a quote-unquote weed. Creeping thyme is non-native as well, but it's naturalized to the point where it exists and pollinators recognize it. And there are commercial bee lawn mixes you can find online, but you should always read the label and check the seed composition before purchasing to make sure that these are the species you actually need to introduce into your lawn and if they will cause any issues in the long run. And also you want to make sure that they are Nova natives. So that way they are supporting the local natives that are in our area better than just a commercial mix that might have come from California. On to establishing a pollinator lawn, I want to talk a little bit about nimblewill. And nimblewill is a Virginia native warm season perennial grass that might already exist in your backyard, but you just didn't know. Right now in January, it is dormant, so it does look like this little ugly brown patch of thick grass, but it is warm season, so that means it's dormant in the winter and it can be slow to green up in the spring. But the reason why we encourage people to grow nimblewill or encourage the existing populations to thrive is because they tend to grow a little bit better in areas where regular grass does not. So in those struggling areas where there's a lot of shade and infertile soil, nimblewill might actually be a better option for these than trying to overseed with a tall fescue. So encouraging this little known native plant into your turfscape might be the best option, but it is just another turf grass to be on the lookout for. You've done the work, you've checked your HOA, you checked your city code, and there's nothing in there that can stop you from having a bee lawn. So you're going to go ahead and do it. But in order to do it, you need to start with a few things. You need to start with that soil test that I mentioned before, and to amend the soil if the test requires you to. So if you have a fairly low pH, you want to get that up a little bit, so you're going to have to lime. And we do recommend that you top dress your lawn regularly and aerate, and you use compost to help feed some nutrients back into the soil. You also need to research what plant species will work best for your property. You need to determine what areas are shaded, what areas are wet, what areas are drier, heavily trafficked, all those different conditions because you have different plant requirements for different types of areas. And also leaving the weeds is an option too. So in the springtime, if you haven't applied a pre-emergent herbicide, you might be seeing some henbit coming up in your yard, and these offer some early pollinator support when weather starts warming up. So these provide some extra food early on in the spring. So if you can live with the weeds, we recommend that you leave it. The same goes for summer weeds such as dandelions and violets and clover, which is considered a weed to many people, but they all offer some pollinator support and food. The bee mix, or you have the seeds ready to create this bee lawn, you can go ahead and do one of two options. You have fall seeding or spring seeding. So in the fall, it's a late fall application period, and that is when the seed is spread after the soil is too cold for germination. So it'll be ready to come up in the spring once conditions arrive. If you do go ahead and do spring seeding, you do it after the risk of frost, but you are going to be experiencing a little bit more spring weeds coming up, and it will need to be watered a little bit more regularly after planting. So it is more recommended to do your fall dormant frost seeding versus your spring seeding. Your soil test, and it does not recommend a lot of soil amendments. Your lawn can be considered healthy, and at this point it will be better to just overseed your lawn with this bee mix to start. So in order to establish a bee lawn, you would have to mow your grass short to approximately 1 inch, rake to expose more soil because you want to ensure good seed to soil contact, and then you may need to core aerate if your soil is already compacted. If you are starting from scratch and you have bare soil, it is recommended to just lightly till the soil and then rake in the seed and water regularly as needed. It is important to remember to be patient. Flowers may take a lot of time to establish, and it may not be that uniform flowery look that most bee lawns have the first year. It might take a couple years for it to establish, but patience is virtue, and it might end up paying off in the long run. Maintained just like regular lawns. They don't require as much watering, but in periods of long drought, they might require a couple of sessions of deep watering just so they can have some water source available. It is recommended to mow a little bit higher, so 4 inches and above, and to mow less frequently, and to avoid mowing when the flowers at their peak bloom, so that way they have an opportunity to go to seed and add more plants to the turfgrass environment. If you are experiencing any undesired weeds, you can spot treat it with herbicide or you can just hand pull them. Sometimes it does not even warrant enough herbicide for one or two plants. So you can always refer to the Home Grounds Pest Management Guide that Virginia Cooperative Extension releases, or you can contact our office for additional guidance on specific weed problems that might show up in your bee lawn or just your regular lawn in general. And remember, you don't have to change all of your lawn now. This can be a gradual process, and baby steps are better than none at all. So any little action will help change the earth for better. I'd like to introduce Yvonne Reid, who is a Master Gardener with Prince William, who will be talking more about specific lawn alternative species for native ground covers.
Lawn alternatives are becoming increasingly popular due to the fact that they offer a sustainable and practical approach to landscaping. Virginia is in the transition zone, very hot in the summer and cold in the winter. This makes it very difficult to maintain cool weather turfs such as Kentucky bluegrass and pine fescue. I would like to present native ground covers as an alternative to turf, especially in those areas that it is very difficult to grow and maintain turf. There are many reasons why homeowners prefer a more eco-friendly lawn alternative. Removing grass and reducing the size of the lawn may be desirable if you cannot grow grass in certain areas because there is too much shade, there is a steep slope, area is moist, or there is unsuitable soil condition. Perhaps there are also areas that are difficult to maintain, such as narrow driveway strips or areas with sharp angles. Maybe you have an area that is largely unused and you would like to add more biodiversity, beauty, and ecological value by putting in a pollinator garden. How do we define ground covers? Currently, there is no consensus on the height of ground covers. According to Virginia Tech, ground covers are low-growing plants, 3 feet and shorter, that spreads to form a relatively dense layer of vegetation. The taller ground covers are more effective in reducing weeds by preventing light from penetrating to the ground. Planting ground covers at high density is important. High plant density eventually provides high coverage, which reduce weeds and prevent erosion. Most ground covers will spread by rhizomes, underground stems, or stolons. Native ground covers can be either evergreen, foliage remains green throughout the growing season, or semi-evergreen, they shed their leaves for a short period of time, or deciduous, they die back in the winter. Why plant native ground covers? Native ground covers are adapted to the local environmental conditions. The deep root system of these plants allow for more efficient access to water, and so once established, they generally require little maintenance. They offer beautiful flowers, produce plenty of fruits and seeds, and offer seasonal changes in colors. Native ground covers also provide vital habitat for wildlife. They produce nectar for pollinators, protective shelter for many mammals, provide essential food such as seeds and fruits for all forms of wildlife. Native ground covers are better for the environment as they use less chemical pesticides and herbicides. What are some of the advantages of native ground covers? Once established, they are very resilient. Because they are adapted to the area, they are easy to establish. Dense coverage of the ground covers retain moisture in the soil, suppresses weed, and prevent erosion. They also reduce soil compaction and manage storm water runoff by helping water soak into the ground instead of running off. They provide year-round protection to the soil. They can provide a simple, beautiful, refined garden space, and they are of ecological value by offering habitat for native fauna, by providing coverage and forage for pollinators and other wildlife. If you're wanting to reduce your lawn area, there are many landscape designs that may be adopted. For example, a native garden, which consists of plants that are indigenous to the area. Or a butterfly garden. This is a garden that attracts and sustains butterflies by providing nectar source and or host to caterpillars. Or you may want to put in a rain garden, a permeable basin or depressed area that collects stormwater runoff and prevents it from reaching the waterways. What about a shade garden, which is made up of plants that thrive despite little or no sunlight? The three most important conditions for healthy plant growth are light, water, and soil. Light is necessary for photosynthesis, which provides essential energy to the plants. Having the right plant growing under the right light exposure is a major step in ensuring a healthy plant growth. Plants grown in full sun require over 6 hours of sun per day. Plants for partial shade require 4 to 6 hours of sun per day, preferably in the morning. Plants for partial shade requires less than 2 hours of direct sun. Dappled sunlight is sunlight that filters through the canopy of the trees. Plants need water for every stage of growth and development. Water is needed for photosynthesis, sturdy growth, nutrient absorption, and so for these reasons, it is important to have source of water. It is best to water plants in the morning when the temperature is cooler to prevent excessive evaporation. It is important to water plant at the soil level. This ensures that the water reaches the root and prevent water from splashing onto leaves, reducing the risk of diseases. Plants that grow in moist to wet areas are typically adapted to withstand the challenges of waterlogged soil. Such plants can tolerate low oxygen level, the ability to absorb excess water, and are resistant to root rot. It is important to note that standing water or frequent flooding will kill or severely weaken many types of plants. If you have an extreme wet area, you need to pay attention to the types of plants selected. Soil is important as it provides water, air, nutrients, and mechanical support for plants. Good soil structure is a soil that has a crumbly texture with a good balance of air, water, and pore space. A healthy soil contains the right balance of nutrients essential for plant growth to include nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Decaying plant and animal material improve soil structure, water retention, and nutrient cycling. A pH range between 6 to 7.5 is ideal for most plant growth. A healthy soil contains a diverse range of microorganisms, including bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes, all of which play important roles in nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, soil structure, and plant health. The ground covers that I will focus on are those that are most problematic in the landscape. Ground covers for shady areas, ground covers for slopes, ground covers for moist, wet areas. Ground covers for shady areas. The foam flower is a small, delicate, deciduous perennial about 1 foot tall. It is a native of Nova and grows well in dappled sunlight to full shade. It prefers well-drained, organic, rich, moist, acidic soil. It has an interesting foliage and has small spikes of creamy white flowers that blooms in the spring. It attracts many pollinators such as bees, butterflies, and moths. It grows relatively slow and spreads by underground rhizomes. This plant would be a very attractive addition to either a butterfly, native, or shade garden. The common wild ginger is a deciduous perennial ground cover that is about 6 inches to a foot tall. It is a native of Nova and grows well in part shade to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist, acidic soil. The tiny brown-purple flowers are hidden under the leaves and do attract pollinators by their sweet fragrance. It spreads by underground rhizomes and is self-pollinating. It tolerates deer browsing, wet soil, heavy shade, and erosion. And this plant would be a beautiful addition to either a butterfly, native, or rain garden. Coral bell is a deciduous perennial ground cover about 3 feet tall. It is native of Nova and grows well in dappled sun to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally dry acidic soil. Tiny bell-shaped flowers emerge in the summer on leafless stalks above the foliage. The flower attracts various pollinators. It is rabbit and deer resistant and would be a very beautiful addition to native, rock, or shade garden. Woodland phlox is a deciduous perennial ground cover about 6 inches to a foot tall. It is native to Nova and grows well in dappled sunlight to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist, acidic to neutral pH soil. It produces loose clusters of blue tubular flowers that emerge in spring. It attracts bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. It is drought and slug resistant and would be a very beautiful addition to a shade, native, or butterfly garden. Green and gold is a very easy to grow evergreen perennial ground cover about 1 to 2 feet tall and spreads by rhizomes. It is a native of Nova and grows well in part shade to full shade. It prefers well-drained, occasionally wet, acidic soil. Its daisy-like bright yellow flowers bloom in spring to summer. It attracts bees, butterflies, and songbirds. It is deer resistant and would be a very attractive addition to a shade, native, rock, or butterfly garden. Wild stonecrop is a 3-inch to 6-inch high evergreen perennial ground cover. This succulent plant is native to Nova and grows well in full sun to full shade. It prefers well-drained, occasionally dry to very dry, neutral to alkaline pH soil. It is very easy to grow. White showy flowers bloom in spring. It attracts pollinators such as butterflies and songbirds. It is deer resistant. It is also drought and poor soil resistant and would be a very beautiful addition to a native or butterfly garden. Native ground covers for slopes. Ground covers chosen for slopes should have the ability to spread and form dense cover, should have a strong root system to prevent erosion, should increase water infiltration and tolerate fluctuating soil moisture and potentially poor soil nutrient, should require little care once established, should provide food and habitat for pollinators and other beneficial insects. The butterfly weed is a deciduous perennial ground cover that is about 2 feet tall. It is native to Nova and grows well in full sun to part shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally dry soil. Its vibrant orange flower, which blooms summer to early fall, attracts many pollinators including bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and moths. It is the host plant of the monarch butterfly. Its deep taproot makes it very effective in stabilizing slopes. Butterfly weed does not transplant well due to its deep taproot and probably best left undisturbed once established. It is rabbit, dare, and drought resistant. This plant would be a very attractive addition to either a butterfly, native, or pollinator garden. The Christmas fern is an evergreen perennial ground cover that grows to about 3 feet tall. It is a native of Nova and grows well in part shade to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist, acidic soil. In mass planting, it makes an excellent plant to combat soil erosion on slopes. It provides winter coverage for songbirds. It is rabbit and squirrel resistant, and this plant is a very attractive addition to either a native shade or winter garden. The golden ragworth is a low-maintenance evergreen perennial ground cover that grows to about 2 feet high. It is a native of Nova and grows well in full sun to part shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally wet soil. The yellow daisy-like flower blooms in spring to summer. It attracts songbirds and pollinators. It can be weedy, but it would still make a very attractive addition to either a native pollinator or rain garden. Wild geranium is a deciduous perennial ground cover that grows to about 1.5 feet tall. It is a native of Nova and grows well in full sun to part shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally wet, acidic to neutral pH soil. The saucer-shaped flowers bloom from spring to summer. It attracts butterflies and other pollinators. Small mammals use this plant as cover. This plant grows as a clump and will need to be planted at high density for full ground coverage. Its taproot makes it suitable for slopes. It tolerates deers and rabbits, and this plant would be a very attractive addition to either a native or butterfly garden. The southern lady fern is a deciduous perennial ground cover that grows to about 3 feet tall. It is a native of Nova and grows well in dappled shade to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally dry, acidic to neutral pH soil. It spreads by underground rhizomes and will form a dense ground cover over time. This plant would be a very attractive addition to either a native or shade garden. Native ground covers for moist to wet areas. Plants that thrive in moist to wet areas have adapted to these conditions and can effectively absorb excess water and grow under anaerobic conditions or low oxygen. Spreading sedge is an evergreen perennial ground cover that grows to about 18 inches high. It is native to Nova and grows well in partial shade to full shade. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally wet, acidic soil. It attracts butterflies, songbirds for its seeds, and other pollinators. It spreads by underground rhizomes and will form a dense ground cover over time. Inconspicuous, creamy white flowers bloom in spring to summer. This plant would be an attractive addition to either a woodland, shade, or butterfly garden. Southern blue flag iris is a deciduous perennial ground cover that grows up to 2.5 feet high. It is native to Nova and grows well in part shade to full sun. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally wet, flooding acidic soil. This iris can be used in ponds of up to 6 inches of water. Its violet blue flower blooms in spring. It forms clump and spread by underground rhizomes. It attracts birds, and this plant would be a very attractive addition to either a native, rain, or water garden. Goldenrod is a perennial ground cover that grows to about 3 feet tall. This compact cascading Nova native grows well in part shade to full sun. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally dry, acidic to neutral pH soil. Arching spires of yellow flowers appear in the summer. Plant attracts butterflies, bees, pollinators, and songbirds, and would be a very attractive addition to either a native butterfly or rain garden. The large blue flag iris is a deciduous perennial ground cover that grows to about 3 feet tall. This plant is a native of Nova and grows well in part shade to full sun. It prefers rich, moist to occasionally wet, flooding neutral to alkaline pH soil. Large blue flowers bloom in summer. It can tolerate up to 4 inches of standing fresh water. This plant attracts butterflies, bumblebees, hummingbirds, and it can tolerate deer browsing. This plant would be a very beautiful addition to a rain or water garden. Golden Alexander is a deciduous perennial ground cover that grows to about 2 feet tall. This Nova native grows well in part shade to full sun. It prefers well-drained, moist to occasionally wet, dry soil. The showy umbel-shaped flowers bloom early summer. It attracts butterflies, songbirds, bees, and this plant would make a very attractive addition to a pollinator, native, or butterfly garden. Before you dig. Before you dig, it is important to recognize that areas in your landscape may vary significantly based on soil type, light exposure, wind, evaporation rates, and moisture levels. Select plants that match site conditions and intentionally group plants together that have similar water and sun exposure. So have a plan. Decide the theme of the landscape. Determine the amount of light. Do you have full sun, part shade, shade? Determine the pH of the soil. Prepare soil by adding organic materials such as compost and mulch. Be aware of plant size at maturity. During the first year, the plant will sleep. It is focusing its energy on getting established. During the second year, the plant will creep. It continues to grow and maybe will flower. During the third year, the plant leaps. It reaches its full size and is expanding. Finally, and most important, during the first year, while the plant is establishing, water frequently.
If you don't know where to start, here are some really good resources that we recommend you check out. On behalf of Virginia Cooperative Extension, I'd like to thank you so much for attending our presentation today on native ground covers and alternatives. If you have any horticulture related questions, feel free to reach out to our help desk, and the information is listed on the screen. And again, thank you so much for attending.